In the year 1246 AD, the devastation caused by the recent Mongol invasions of the Kingdom of Hungary were taken advantage of by the king's enemies. The Duchy of Austria, ruled by Frederick II of Babenberg, had crossed his eastern frontier into Hungary, seeking battle with its king, Béla IV of the House of Arpad. The battle was a disaster for the Austrians. Even though the Hungarian force was routed, the Duke himself, last living man of the House of Babenberg, was killed in battle. Having left no male heirs, both the Duchies of Austria and Styria were now without a ruler, left for their neighbors to fight over. At the time, the Kingdom of Bohemia, north of Austria, was ruled by King Václav I of the Przemysl dynasty. Soon after the Duke of Austria's death, Václav married his son and heir, Prince Otakar, to Margaret of Austria, thus securing the Czech hold on the duchies. Eventually, Václav would pass away, and his son Otakar was crowned King of Bohemia, whose domain now extended south all the way down to Styria. However, the Hungarian King Béla was not going to remain idle. In the end, it was his army that had extinguished the House of Babenberg in battle, but now his nephew Otakar was reaping the rewards. Therefore, all along the decade of 1250, Hungarian detachments raided the border settlements of the Bohemian Kingdom, and bitter conflict arose between the Bohemian and Hungarian kings. Eventually, King Béla managed to involve the papacy in the feud, who divided the late Duke Frederick's land in two and allowed Otakar to remain as Austria's ruler, while granting Béla the right over Styria. And thus, the Hungarian king's son and heir, István, became the Duke of Styria. However, István's rule faced fierce opposition from the Styrian local nobility. This opposition came in the form of violent action against the Hungarian authorities, the attacks likely supported by the Bohemian king himself. In the year 1260, barely 2 years after István's appointment as the Duke of Styria, Hungarian authorities were driven out of the duchy. The fact that the Bohemian king Otakar was supporting the Styrian nobility aggravated the matter, and King Béla's response did not take long. Béla IV gathered a great army, which he aimed to march into the land of the Czechs and settle the matter of the duchies for good. When the mustering was complete, a mighty force of around 35,000 men marched towards Bohemia, determined to humble the Czech king. As for King Otakar, he also gathered his vassals for the fight. In total, he would bring around 30,000 men to the field. Finally, in early July of the year 1260 AD, both armies met on the border along the Morava River. On the eastern bank, King Béla IV of Hungary assembled his forces. The wind flew countless banners, not only from Hungary, but from his Croatian vassals and Poland as well. The proud Hungarian knights and men-at-arms were joined by a significant detachment from Krakow, as well as by numerous Cuman, Bulgarian and Russian mercenaries. The light cavalry contingent was led by King Béla's son and heir to the throne István Árpád. In total, the army of the King of Hungary amounted to around 35,000 men, slightly overpowering the enemy. On the opposite bank of the Morava River, King Otakar had also called his men for battle. A long line of infantry stood ready for the action, with ample cavalry detachments in the rear and at the flanks. Like his uncle, Otakar had also called upon his allies for help, and since the Austrian and Styrian elites supported his cause, the local nobility would join him in battle against the Hungarians. The most notable commanders were Vok I of Rosenberg, founder of the Rosenberg noble family, and Jaros of Poděus, who stood in command of the elite Bohemian cavalry known as the Iron Lords. In total, King Otakar had brought to the field around 30,000 men, slightly less than his uncle. Once the two armies formed, a long waiting game began. It was clear that whoever crossed the Morava River into enemy territory would face an almost decisive disadvantage. Such a maneuver would take time, and the men crossing into the other bank would be out of formation and almost defenseless against any large-scale attack. Therefore, both King Otakar and King Béla remained in place, testing each other's patience, first for hours and then for entire days. After 10 long days of exasperating wait under the unforgiving summer sun, King Otakar spurred his horse forward and galloped towards the enemy host, accompanied by his closest knights. After tense moments, King Béla corresponded with the obvious parley attempt of his nephew and rode to meet him in the river ford. The Bohemian king was confident in his possibilities in a fair fight and therefore offered his uncle a day of truce so the Hungarian army would cross peacefully into the western bank of the Morava River. Despite being rivals, Otakar and Béla held each other's honor in high regard, and proof of this is that Otakar's offer was accepted by the King of Hungary. Thus, on the 12th of July, the Hungarian force would cross the Morava River, and on July 13th, a pitched battle would take place. In the early morning of the 12th of July, while the Czech withdrew, the first Hungarian contingents initiated the crossing. The vanguard was made up of the bulk of the Cuman fighters and was led by the king's son and heir, István. The role of these riders would be to act as initial skirmishing force during the day of battle. As the Cumans ventured into the ford, the rest of the army began the operation. Dust rose up as thousands of feet marched towards the western side of the Morava. By the time István's Cumans made it to the opposite bank, a significant part of Otakar's forces was still withdrawing from their position. It was then that tragedy struck. Perhaps due to their tribal nature, some of the riders that had crossed into the enemy bank either misunderstood or ignored their commanders and began loosing arrows on the marching Bohemian infantry. Chaos soon ensued, and even though István likely tried to prevent any further action from his troops, a general mounted charge by the Cumans eventually took place. The truce had been broken. Attacked from behind and taken by surprise, the Czech infantry was easy prey for the swift cavalrymen. King Otakar observed the massacre unfold from his retired position and soon coordinated the counterattack.
Postupujte vpřed!
Along with his retinue, he spurred towards one of the flanks, while Jaros of Podjehus led the Iron Lords towards the other. Back at the field of death, the Czechs attempted to reorganize and fight back the Cumans. By that time, the King of Hungary had already committed his entire force to the crossing, and now thousands of men scrambled for the other shore, the king's cavalry trying to make their way through the tide of soldiers. Otakar's counterattack would arrive before the Hungarian infantry could reform the line, so Béla's only chance was to form up the few riders who crossed in time. Finally, Otakar led a terrible charge into Béla's retinue. Everywhere to be seen, proud knights either killed or were killed, and the kings of Bohemia and Hungary personally engaged in the melee. At the same time, Jaros of Podjehus had led the fearsome Iron Lords towards the opposite flank and now carried out a violent charge towards the unprepared Hungarians who had barely reached the shore. Along the battle line, all of the contingents in Otakar's army eventually joined battle. After heavy fighting, King Béla realized that his own retinue was being overrun by his nephew's knights and retired from the field, fording the Morava back to Hungary. All around him, Hungarian infantry was cut down by the overwhelming Czech push, and the river ford was a chaotic mass of men desperate to save their lives. The Battle of Kressenbrunn was lost for the Hungarians. King Otakar chased off his retiring uncle until he was sure the king was out of the field, and reformed his knights for a devastating charge on the Hungarian infantry. The charge of the King of Bohemia was the straw that broke the camel's back. The few Hungarians who still put up a fight gave up, and a massive rout ensued, with the thousands of soldiers in Béla's army attempting to ford the river back to their camp. The battle was over, and the massacre had begun. By the end of the day, King Otakar II Rzemisyl was victorious. It is estimated that around a third of King Béla's army had perished, many of them drowning in the Morava when trying to flee. With his victory at Kressenbrunn, King Otakar had solidified his position as the uncontested Duke of Austria and Styria, and soon made peace with King Béla, marrying his niece Kunhuta. From this battle onwards, King Otakar II Śremysl would be remembered as the Iron and Gold King. If you stayed until the end and enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my small channel for Total War documentaries. I script, record and narrate everything by my own means, so if you could leave a like and a comment as a form of support, I would be immensely grateful. Thank you for watching and have a good day.